Okay. Okay, welcome everybody to our gathering here to gather information from Marc Rieke, our consultant on the capital campaign for our new building, which you can see there's some digging going on. I hear from Mo that the ironwork's coming in for the foundations this week, so we're going to start more serious digging and get that foundation established before we get any really heavy rain. So it's exciting that we're underway. So as you know, I think maybe some of you met Marc when he was here, it was about a month ago for an initial visit. And Marc has had combinations of individual meetings in person and online with people, and he's also collected a lot of the questionnaires that people submitted responding to the request for feedback on the capital campaign project. So thanks for everybody who's participated in that initial work. So today Marc is going to speak to us about what he's found from his gathering all this information, meeting with people, and to give us kind of a good sense of direction of where we're going very soon with carrying on our plan for the county campaign. So welcome Marc to come forward and inform us. Thank you.
I've been told it's acceptable to unmask here. I did test negative yesterday, so before travel. So thank you. And I would like to be able to see my face and be able to hear also as well. But thank you for the invitation to join us today. I really appreciate it. And thank you for all of the work that has gone into this process so far. This is my second time joining you for worship. I've been here other times on site to do interviews, but my second worship with you, and it's an absolute delight. You are a blessed people. I'll give you a little bit more introduction about myself for those of you who don't know me or haven't met me yet. My name is Marc Rieke, and I serve as a consultant to Christian churches in the area of capital fund development. So I help them do things like feasibility studies and lead successful capital fund campaigns. My husband and I have our home just outside the Tacoma, Washington area, where it's a lot colder than it is here today. So it's kind of nice to be in Berkeley with the sun and moderate temps. So thank you for that opportunity. Our home congregation in Tacoma is Bethany Presbyterian Church. And though it's a little smaller than you here at First Congregational, it has a very similar feel and a very similar kind of culture. So it's very comfortable for me to be here and to interact with all of you. So thank you again for the opportunity to serve you, for the opportunity to join you and be a partner with you in this process. For about the next 30 to 45 minutes, I want to unpack some of the information that I've gained for your feasibility study. And the first thing I want to talk a little bit about is just to frame this presentation so you know where it's coming from. History of the process. We've been in conversation now for at least 6 months or so around your project. And the partnership occurred by virtue of references, I think, to Pastor Molly and a few other folks who knew of my work and knew of my engagement with churches. Many of you know that I've been active in the Berkeley area recently, having served All Souls Episcopal Parish not far from you here just last year in a $4 million campaign. And so to be back in this area seemed a good fit. So you invited me several months ago to come and serve you in 2 initiatives, the first being feasibility study to give guidance for the capital campaign, and the second was for helping you actually strategize and unfold a successful capital fund campaign. In terms of the model and the approach, the intent was that these 2 things would work in tandem, the feasibility study informing the capital fund campaign. And the other piece that was key was that the feasibility study process was not designed to be a simple thumbs up, thumbs down kind of process. Oftentimes people perceive that when they hear feasibility study. you're going to tell us whether we can do this or not. It wasn't that simple. This was more about how best to move forward and how to make this a possibility for you. And I will tell you at this point that the information I have to share with you, at least from my perspective, is very positive, very constructive, and very affirming of that. And hopefully you'll see why as I unpack some of those things for you. In terms of the planning and the materials that we developed together in conversation with your planning team, your pastoral leadership, and some additional members of council, we put together a couple of pieces that included some renderings, many of which you've seen. I believe you've seen elements like this in the past. And this showing the rendering of the new building as it's imagined. I think I got one more in here, another view of the new building as it's imagined. We also put together what was essentially considered a case for support, a case statement, meaning information about the building project itself, what it would contain, costs, and so on, and why it was an important element for you here at First Church. So those pieces were developed and they were unfolded then through the study as background information. And the last piece we developed then was a set of questions that would be common for all people. In terms of the design, then you're going to unfold those pieces to everyone, regardless of how they participated, whether it was in person in an interview, whether it was online in the survey, or whether it was via a paper survey. So there were a couple of ways to access the information, but everybody had access to the same information. In terms of the objectives of the study, first thing was simply to get a feel. What do people feel about First Congregational Church? What are their perceptions of this place? And I tell people, particularly in the individual interviews, I really value those because as much as I get information from people, I also get affect from people. It's not just what you're telling me, it's also how are you telling me that information. And so that rings strongly for me. It was also to gauge how aware people were and what their attitude was toward the proposed rebuilding project. What do you know and how do you feel about it? And then obviously to try to gauge some sense of anticipated gift response to that. How much should we be willing to give into such a project on behalf of the church? We also wanted to know if there are any significant factors that have bearing on the success of the capital campaign, either good or not so good. And then the last thing we wanted to gauge was what people were saying about the project and the information available about it was, meaning where do we need to sharpen the pencil a little bit? Where do we need to provide a bit more information or clarify for people in this process? In terms of the methodology, the study was specifically designed to elicit feedback and responses from folks who were most active in the church, active in leadership and or active in small giving. And that's very purposeful. That was not to make it off limits to anybody else, but it was to say that as the leadership of the church goes, so typically others will follow. If your leaders in a church are not in favor of a project or have a problem, that's going to color the experience for everyone else. So we specifically wanted to reach out to folks who are active in leadership, active in giving. Beyond that, we did make this accessible to everybody as well. So anybody could opt in, but our target audience mostly were those people who were in leadership. So I conducted confidential and personal interviews with 23 households. We had a target of 25, and we did 23 out of the 25. And I believe the other two who were on that target list participated perhaps in another way. Beyond that, we mailed questionnaires to an additional 50 households and made the survey available online as well. And thanks to your church staff who have been phenomenal in their support. I appreciate that. They've been wonderful. We've got some great folks who were very supportive behind the scenes, and I value that. So we have 32 written questionnaires returned out of a set of 50, and we had an additional 10 online responses that were received and sent to me. So in total, you had 65 households represented in this survey that I've been on back for you. And again, everybody had a chance to see the case statement and the study questionnaire. So everybody was responding to the same information. So who were, a little bit of background about the folks who participated. One of the things that I'm always interested to know is how long have the people who are responding been a part of the church? And I don't know if these bar graphs are going to show up really well for you, but essentially they run from left to right, showing the length of term that you've got in the church, how long you've been active here. The far right bar, the one that's the tallest, that represents 20 years or more of membership. So you can clearly see that the majority of respondents in this survey are long-time members or people who have been active with the church for a long time. That's meaningful. That's meaningful because these are people who have a deep heart. And again, it's not to say that other groups aren't important, it's simply to say that those people who have been invested over a long time are still, responding and still active with the church as well. The other takeaway from this slide in general is simply that you did have representation across the board. So you have respondents from people who have been here for a few years, all the way up. So you have a representation across the board, which I think is important. Beyond simply how long you've been active, it's important for me to understand how do people perceive First Church? What did they say about it? So we posed a question to people about what do you say about your church? What do you say? And there were some really common trends that came out. First was that you are a welcoming and warm people. You literally welcome everyone here. You say that in opening comments, and you model that in the way that you interact in this congregation. People said consistently that you are progressive and liberal, and they noted theologically, socially, in terms of social justice kinds of issues, politically as well. You are diverse, accepting, and inclusive. People highlighted that you are a non-creedal church, that you don't have to believe in a certain way. You don't have to believe at all. Again, you say that, but people noted that in response back to me. You are an intelligent and creative group, great for families, blessed with excellent music, and you've got a real focus on social justice and community outreach. Those were some of the highlights that came out of that response. Then we wanted to gauge how aware people were of the rebuilding process. What did they know? And so we posed to them what you know, and we gave them responses from very aware to a middle category of somewhat aware, and then finally not aware, don't know what you're talking about. Gratefully, the majority were very aware. 81% said they were 80, or they were very aware. 19% said somewhat aware. Nobody said they were not aware. So those responding at least, they had definitely heard about this. That may seem a silly thing in a lot of ways, because I know in this congregation we've been talking about this for a very long time. But you'd be surprised in some congregations where, even though they've been talking about it for a long time, you put it in front of people, they say, that was not the case here. People clearly knew about the rebuilding process. That's a good indicator that you've got people who are conscious about this. Then we wanted to gauge where people were with the notion of utilizing a capital fund campaign to raise a portion of the funds to help the rebuilding project. And so we asked, do you support First Church conducting a capital campaign? We gave them responses from strongly agree, that's on the far left, to agree, to a middle position that was neither agree nor disagree, and then disagree on the other side. And there should be a strongly disagree in there as well. There was the other one right, I can see it in the graph here. But long story short, the majority of people were either in the strongly agree or the agree category. So between those two, you've got 92% of your respondents agreeing that it's a good idea to conduct a capital fund campaign to fund a portion of this building project. Then the next thing we wanted to do is, while you may think that's a good concept, we want to test, do you feel you know enough about the mission of First Congregational and affirm that mission that would allow you to actually commit a gift here? So do you feel rooted enough here to actually commit funds philanthropically here? And again, same kind of scale. And where that shook out is that 95% affirmed that mission as a basis for actually making financial commitments. So to recap the last couple of slides, what you've got people who are very aware of a project, who are affirming the capital fund campaign, and they're affirming the mission here that says, yes, I can see my way clear to actually make a gift or commitment to that capital campaign, if that makes sense. That's how those indicators are connected. One of the pieces that we put forward to folks in the case statement was that there was a need to fund the basically permitted building. And then there was a potential need to fund enhancement projects as a part of that building process. And the enhancement projects included making the kitchen a fully functional cooking kitchen versus a catering kitchen, having an enhanced audiovisual package with screens that drop down from the ceiling in the assembly hall and that sort of thing, having a tiled labyrinth in the outside patio space, and finally installing a sculptured patio screen as a part of the installation. That would be another chunk of expense above and beyond the basic permitted building. And so we asked people, if you needed to, for financial reasons, to prioritize those projects, those 4 projects, 1 to 4, with 1 being the most important, the top priority, how would you put them in prioritization order should you need to fund them in that way? And the ranking came back fairly clearly. In your top tier, if you will, you had the kitchen and the audiovisual package, with kitchen being the first rank. So we gave them essentially a weighted score when we took these responses. So the kitchen took the most first rankings, if you will. The audiovisual package next in priority, and then it was fairly even between the labyrinth and the patio screen. I'm going to say a word about those enhancement projects here a little bit when we get to the funding portion. But that gives you some idea of where people's thoughts were running when they thought about that. We did also ask how people felt about the possibility, should it be needed, of the church taking on a construction loan in order to complete the project here. And while it was not as strongly agreed, there was still an open door, because you've got 47% of your folks agreeing, 35 had no opinion, that's sort of the middle bar there, and you only had 17% disagreeing. I do not believe this will be a necessary scenario for you to take on any long-term debt. The only thing I can think of for you might be that if you wish to accelerate the timeline in the process, you may wish to take a short-term bridge loan to be able to begin that and pay that back right away. And again, you're going to see that you clearly will have capacity to do that. But this is not a blocker. This indicator doesn't show any blockage in terms of saying, if it's wisely done, I think there's an open door here for you when you've got that many people who either agree or don't feel strongly about it. Probably one of the most interesting indicators that we asked people to respond to was, what can you imagine happening in this new space that you're building? That's kind of the fun part. Now project yourself into this new building and imagine what will happen. And all sorts of responses came back. These were some of the primary trends that we saw. First of all, it will be a blessing in terms of being a fellowship and a gathering space, a place where we can have receptions and meals, weddings and funerals. Many people hark back to your former building that you had there, Pilgrim Hall, and remembered many of the things that happened there, and talked about how it would be wonderful to have that kind of space available to you again. Many people also lifted up the opportunity for alternate worship, a flexible space that could be large or small, where you could do contemplative worship and that sort of thing. Also, a lot of community use. So concerts, rehearsals, outside groups using it for meetings or conferences or presentations or that sort of thing. Also dedicated Sunday school space and faith formation space, rather than having to move around the building and figure out where we're going to be. to have that dedicated space again. Some people went to the pragmatic and said it would be a great space to rent and an income source for the church, and that's true, it is that. And then finally, consistent dedicated office space for your ministry staff. All of those things embodied within that building. And what they were responding to in part, I imagine, were some of these renderings. You see these two, this image of your beautiful assembly hall that's planned, light and bright and spacious. Youth space and meeting space. This, I believe, would be a rendering showing the second floor space that would be there. So then we got to the point of asking people how they might fund into a capital fund campaign. You may have difficulty discerning this graph just a little bit. But what we asked people to do was, based on everything you've responded to so far, and if you are seeing your way clear to be able to imagine making a gift to a capital campaign, what might the total of that gift be? We couched it in this way. First of all, gifts to a capital fund campaign would be above and beyond regular giving to the church, sustaining giving, I believe you call it here. So that which funds your annual ministry program, that's your sort of regular offering or your regular giving. Capital campaign gifts would be above and beyond that, not in place of it. The second thing is that people would have a 3-year window within which to complete their capital fund gift. So while your sustaining gift, I believe, is seen as a 1-year commitment or annual stewardship, if you will, the capital campaign would be a special commitment above and beyond that would play out over a 3-year span. And to each participant of the study, then, we offered a series of ranges, everywhere from a gift of $300,000 or more, down to a gift of zero, nothing. And we got responses. There were only a couple of people who offered no response to this, but nobody listed zero. That's good news. That's good news. I take the no response as I'm thinking about it. And I probably will participate. If people want to tell you zero, they will tell you zero. I've learned that. Nobody said zero. You had a good range, and you can discern that at least from this graph. You had a good range across the board of gifting, but a couple of takeaways. First of all, you've got that range of gifting, which is appropriate because you have a range of resources within this congregation. Second takeaway is you have the presence of some stronger lead gifts, specifically gifts in the $75,000 to $150,000 range, and down a few from that. The presence of lead gifts tends to suggest that there is both momentum and capacity within the congregation to realize the types of goals that you're looking at. The second is that the presence of lead gifts has the capacity to motivate other people in terms of their gifting. If everybody is clumped down around the $1,500, $3,000 level, that's kind of one story. But when you've got people spread out, with some people, expressing the capacity that God's given them over here, that tends to motivate other people to say, what's a generous gift for me as I have been blessed? So I may not be the $150,000 donor. I may be more in the $1,500 dollar range, but maybe because of that inspiration, I could see myself moving to $2,000, $2,500, $3,000, something like that. So the motivation of that breadth of giving is significant in terms of looking at how response patterns happen for folks. In terms of averages, I don't tend to work off of averages, if you will, but the average number was fairly strong, and that's a positive indicator as well. Primary one that I think is the best indicator is the fact that we got so many responses on this. Again, if people want to tell you zero, or people don't want to respond, they'll just ice you out on this question. They just don't respond. Your people responded, and I think responded in a way that's appropriate for the capacity you have here. So what does all that mean? Well, I'll show you this information here. The explicit commitment, meaning what people actually indicated by marking a range in response to this indicator, suggested that on the high end, from this response group, you might gain as much as $850,000. That's what they said explicitly. Now, I think they say explicitly because you did not ask them to make the commitment. This is an estimate only. I factor in a couple of things for you. The first of all is that because it's an early estimate and not a commitment, people have not fully discerned what the significance of their gift might be. Meaning, people might actually increase, and I would anticipate they will increase their gifts through a complete campaign process. So these are not the last word, if you will. The other piece, of course, is that this is not your entire congregation. This is a leadership slice of your congregation that we've sampled. So there are more people out there who may commit. So with those things in mind, I suggest to you that you have a projected range in terms of talking about goals, setting goals for a capital campaign that would range between 900,000 and 1.5 million. I believe you have the capacity for far more than that. In honesty, I cannot substantiate that to you by the responses of this survey, so you need to hear me say that credibly. But I believe that you would have the capacity for up to $2 million from this congregation currently. And I say that for a couple of reasons. One, you have the evidence of representative wealth within this congregation and affluence. You have people who are deeply committed and who love this congregation. You have a sense of urgency around this building. You've been talking about it forever, and you want to make it happen. So people are ready to go. All of those factors combined suggest that there's more there. But the other piece you need to hear me say clearly is that capacity is not the same as a guarantee. Capacity says just that. You've got the potential to raise this kind of money. The challenge of the capital campaign will be, do you have the heart and will as God's people here to exercise that capacity and make it come true? So with that, I say there's good news for you, because the gap that we currently seek to fund, and someone will correct me if I say it wrong here, but the gap that we seek to fund to build your basic permitted building is about $700,000. Beyond that, it's stopping me, so I guess I'm good so far. The piece that you need to fund your enhancement projects is somewhere between $600,000 and $700,000. So in total, the maximum of those two would be $1.4 million. Nobody's stopping me, good. We're still on track with the numbers. That means that in terms of capacity, you clearly have the capacity in this congregation to not only fund your basic permitted building, but to fund the enhancement projects in addition to that. I hope, good, that's good news. Yay, good news. All right. So I think that you're in a good spot to be able to, to make that a reality. We asked just a couple of more questions from folks. We asked this question as a test. Some churches, when they conduct a capital fund campaign, will choose to take a portion of the funds raised and dedicate it to outreach ministry away from the church. So in addition to funding whatever their project is internally, they'll take a tithe gift or a percentage gift or a targeted dollar amount, and they'll say that's going to Berkeley Food Pantry, for example, which you supported this morning in your plate offerings, that sort of thing. We asked people how they felt about that. Is that a good idea or not? This was the one indicator where you did not have a clear trend. There was the greatest disparity of thought on this one indicator. So 24% said yes, 37% said no, 39% were undecided. My recommendation back to the council has been that if they wish to pursue this, that it's a topic that will require much more thought and discernment and dialogue with the congregation before accessing it. Because it does have the potential to either be misunderstood or to misdirect. So this is one that just needs more dialogue before you do anything with that. We also asked people if they would appreciate help considering how gifts could be made with assets other than cash. The answer overwhelmingly was no. A few people said yes. The no, though, was not because they don't plan to access assets like a stock gift or a property gift, but rather that they were already savvy as to how to do that. That indicator is always telling to me that people haven't thought about it. Well, wonderful, we're going to provide information. I still suggest we provide the information because there may be strategies that people have not yet thought about in terms of accessing to make a good gift. But I think the majority of respondents in this survey suggested that they were already good in that department. And then the last thing they asked was whether there were any opportunities for matching gifts programs in any walk of life that people had. And again, overwhelmingly it was no, which is not a surprise. A few people tentatively thought maybe, and it's worth pursuing those. The majority, though, of employers and that sort of thing typically don't necessarily offer matching programs for church building. If they do offer programs, it typically has to do more with parallel programs from the secular side in terms of service that may happen through a facility or that sort of thing. We also did ask for some responses in terms of who people might recommend for leadership in a capital fund campaign. Some of those faces you see up here. Some of those faces are the usual suspects, I suppose, but there were other names that were listed as well, and I've provided those back to your leadership team. It will be important for people to volunteer and get engaged in some way in actually doing the capital campaign. That's a part of the process, is to invite people to do that. So I'll issue that invitation to all of you as well. There'll be lots of ways to get involved. If you are not necessarily anxious for a strong leadership position, there will be opportunities to do things like helping write materials or host a small group for information dialogue, or do a prayer activity or a spiritual formation activity or that sort of thing. Things that are a little bit more bite-sized, but still important in the running of the capital fund campaign. There's a couple more slides in terms of observations and recommendations for you, and then I'll gladly take some questions here. There's a deep history in this congregation that was clear. There are a lot of positive feelings present and a lot of personal dedication that came through in this study. You have people who love this place and who want to be able to be supportive. There are also pastoral and lay leadership strengths that are very evident here. You are in a stable, healthy situation as much as any congregation, and you clearly have people who have the capacity to unfold a successful campaign here and to manage a significant building project as well. It is important that you continue your work on the stewardship theme for your annual fund, and primarily to talk about how that works and how things are funded and where the money comes from, and what is needed as well. In the midst of a capital fund campaign, people get focused on the building, and that's great. That's what they should do, but not at the exclusion of the annual fund. So the way we will message that, obviously, is that the capital giving is above and beyond, but also be able to lift up the needs of the annual campaign as well. Keep that work up. Don't forget that work. You also need to continue the work of educating people on the rebuilding process. For many of the respondents, they had touched this process early on and then hadn't heard about it for a while, and then this was a refresher. So they were technically aware or somewhat aware of the process, but they weren't necessarily up to speed on the current situation of the building. So a part of the capital fund campaign will be to educate or re-educate or reacquaint people with that information. The other piece will be to sharpen the pencil on the expenses and make sure that project costs are very clearly articulated in the context of the capital fund campaign, so people know exactly what they're giving for it. And the last piece I'd say in terms of the education also has to do with making sure people understand the intersection between your rebuilding process and the development or redevelopment of Durant House as affordable housing. What's the intersection of those two projects? What's the impact? So on and so forth. Because there seemed to be just a touch of confusion about, are we doing this or doing that? And I think the answer is something you all know, but need to articulate for folks here. In terms of perceptions about regarding the church designating a portion of funds from the capital campaign to outreach, again, that one needs a lot more discernment if you want to pursue it. In terms of financial resource and volunteer leadership strengths, there's plenty there that suggest, yes, you have the capacity to launch a very successful capital fund campaign. And in terms of timing, you're currently on track to unfold that in the early part of 2023, sometime between late January through May. And I suggest that you continue on that track. As Nick pointed out, you're starting the building process already. People have that sense of urgency. There's momentum for this, so it makes sense to capture that increase in that momentum and launch forward in a timely way. So that's what I've got for you. I'll gladly take any questions. And if there are questions that go beyond my scope, I'm going to point to someone else. Questions I can answer for you. Oh, here we go. Right.
First of all, thank you, Mark. It was a good presentation. There was a slide that I got confused on, and if you could pull it up. It's the one that had to do with the kitchen and three other things. And there were the question had to do with there were 4 bars with different colors.
Right.
And that I didn't get what those were about.
Thank
you. You can explain that.
Sure. So that simply had to do with the weighting. So how many 1 votes did a thing get? How many 2 votes, 3 votes, 4 votes? Does that make sense? Meaning ranking. So for example, the dark purple, what I'm seeing the dark purple here suggests ranking 1s. How many ranking 1s do people give the kitchen, for example? The lighter purple was how many ranking 2s they give. The blue, the dark blue, I think, is ranking 3, and the light blue is ranking 4. And then we weighted those scores. Does that make sense? So the more 1 or 2 votes something got, prioritization 1 or 2, level 1 or 2, I guess, the higher it rose in the ranking. Does that make sense? So those bars are simply meant to represent how many people gave it what priority level. Correct, ranked choice voting, exactly. Yep, thank you. Other questions? Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, this is great. How are we dealing with things like inflation, with the cost of voting, and we can, you know, a couple of years from now, this could be 20% more expensive. I just wondered how that relates to the fundraising for.
Sure. So there I'm going to point to another voice, actually probably the voice next to you or someone that you would call on to speak to that, because I know that is a consideration.
Yes, I can answer that. So the contract, most of the contract proposals is fixed price. So the inflation has been, it hit us, and that's one reason why we're paying. And so it should, you know, we should get some protection from that from here on out. Although we are in the process of getting all the subcontracts put together and, you know, finding some good news, bad news, but you know, still by the time we get rolled, the inflation been built in the process. And also we're heading to a recession, so we may end up not with inflation.
Other questions? I just need to observe personally that it has been an absolute delight getting to know folks in this congregation. One of the things that's not registered in the survey, but I'll say it anyway, in-person interviews. Everyone that got scheduled showed up and was on time. That's amazing. That almost never happens to me, so thank you. Everybody was so kind and gracious in the interview as well. And sometimes people come loaded for bear, you know, they want to give it to you. Nobody did that. That was so nice. And I really appreciate that. But seriously, there's so many hallmarks, I think, here that bear out some of those indicators about, you know, what do people say about First Church. It really is true. You are a wonderful, warm, welcoming people. You've been very good to me, and I appreciate that. So it's been a real delight getting to know you. I look forward to being able to partner with you. And I'll say this also for those who are hopefully seeing this recorded version, or for any of you You all know how to find me. You know my cell phone and you know my email. So if questions come up beyond today and you want to chat or you want to find out something or get my perspective on it, please feel free to reach out at any time. I appreciate that. People often say, I got one little question and I want to know. That's great. If I can help with an answer or get you connected to the answer, I'd like to do that. So thank you very much.
One thing I was just thinking about, you talked a little bit about the calendar that I had. It might be good for people to kind of hear a little bit more detail, like starting January. I mean, what are the different parts of an actual campaign and how it would wind up, that sort of thing.
Excellent.
You can just put a little bit more detail to that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nick. So to flesh out sort of the overview of a good capital fund campaign in a church congregation, in a church setting, we're talking about a span of roughly 3.5 to 4 months. So I'm imagining, again, it's a span that's late January through May in that time. Try to wrap things up. I think we currently have a draft calendar that wraps us up before Memorial Day in the spring, at least with most of your heavy lifting. The front end of that span of time is largely setting the table, if you will. So it's providing information both in print, online, as well as opportunities for people to consume and process that information. So in addition to providing information, it also means then small dialogue groups, cottage meetings, if you will, for people now to come around that information. And even if it's hearing the story again, it's really good to tell it again, even if you really know it well. The reason being that in the context of the capital fund campaign, people listen with different ears. It was all well and good when we were talking about the concept, but now you're asking me to do something about it. And so people listen with different ears. So to bring them back to that story and to do Q&A around them to answer questions is really time well spent. The other piece in terms of laying the table has to do with some spiritual formation things, which I think are important. Invite people into book study, invite people into Bible study, invite people into prayer activities, or things that allow them to express the spiritual side of First Church. It's not because the spirit piece is the money piece, but it's because that's a part of being church together. And that's really what this is about. So putting those things together that prepares not just the mind, but also the heart and the soul makes a lot of sense in terms of running a good capital fund campaign that's church based. So those things typically play out over the first half, perhaps, of your campaign. And then the second half has to do with now helping people think about how do you want to respond to what you've heard and experienced. So that's now beginning to consider what might a financial commitment look like for me. And we do that in a couple of ways. We will invite advanced commitments in that phase. And unlike secular philanthropy, we don't invite those advanced commitments too far in advance, just a little bit in advance of the rest of the congregation. But then we have that first wave, if you will. Then we have a general in-gathering where other people where everyone else is essentially invited to participate. And the last phase is, I think, just as you do with your annual work, we'll do outreach to people who don't respond. We want to make sure that everyone has been invited. We want to make sure that everyone has had a chance to make a response, even if the response is no thank you, that's fine. We want to make sure that everyone's had their chance. And then we officially close the active phase of the campaign. So the process next year will begin with starting with the leadership team that I'll meet with and train and help unfold the capital fund campaign. We'll do that fairly early in January, and then anticipate public announcement of the capital fund campaign by about the 3rd week or so, I believe it is, in January. And then you'll see those activities play out over the course of time. So things to look forward to will be more information, opportunities to get involved in dialogue and spiritual formation, opportunities to consider your own financial commitment, and opportunities to celebrate as well. Near the end of the process, if we are able and healthy enough to do it, we would anticipate doing some social gatherings as well to help celebrate what you're doing here as a part of the process. And then what happens after that active phase, you go into the gifting phase. So now imagine the rest of 2023 to 24, 25 to mid-year 2026 would be the end of your actual gift collection phase. Other questions I can answer for you? Thank you.
So no further questions, we'll adjourn the meeting. Thanks so much to everybody for attending, and thanks for that. We'll be seeing you soon.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Very good.